hymn to the morning, Phyllis Wheatley. Attend my lays, ye ever-honored nine. Assist my labors and my strains refine. In smoothest numbers pour the notes along, for bright Aurora now demands my song. Aurora, hail, and all the thousand dyes, which deck thy progress through the vaulted skies. The morn awakes, and wide extends her rays. On every leaf the gentle zephyr plays. Harmonious lays the feathered race resume. Dart the bright eye and shake the printed plume. Yet shady groves your vendant gloom display, to shield your poet from the burning day. Calliope, awake the sacred lyre, while they fair sisters fan the pleasing fire. The bowers, the gales, the variegated skies, in all their pleasures in my bosom rise. See in the east the illustrious king of day. His rising radiance drives the shades away, but oh, I feel his fervid beams too strong, and scarce begun concludes the abortive song.
Enlightenment by Natasha Trethewey. In the portrait of Jefferson that hangs at Monticello, he is rendered two-toned, his forehead white with illumination, a lit bulb, the rest of his face in shadow, darkened as if the artist meant to contrast his bright knowledge, its dark subtext. By 1805, when Jefferson sat for the portrait, he was already linked to an affair with his slave. Against a backdrop, blue and ethereal, a wash of paint that seems to hold him in relief, Jefferson gazes out across the centuries, his lips fixed, as if he's just uttered some final word. The first time I saw the painting, I listened as my father explained the contradictions, how Jefferson hated slavery, though, out of necessity, my father said, had to own slaves. That his moral philosophy meant he could not have fathered those children. Would have been impossible, my father said. For years we debated the distance between word and deed. I'd follow my father from book to book, gathering citations, listening as he named, like a field guide to Virginia, each flower and tree and bird, as if to prove a man's pursuit of knowledge is greater than his shortcomings, the limits of his vision. I did not know then the subtext of our story, that my father could imagine Jefferson's words made flesh in my flesh, the improvement of the blacks in body and mind in the first instant of their mixture with the whites, or that my father could believe he'd made me better. When I think of this now, I see how the past holds us captive, its beautiful ruin etched on the mind's eye. My young father, a rough outline of the old man he's become, needing to show me the better measure of his heart, an equation writ large at Monticello. That was years ago. Now we take in how much has changed. Talk of Sally Hemings, someone asking, how white was she? Parsing the fractions as if to name what made her worthy of Jefferson's attentions. A near white, quadroon mistress, not a plain black slave. Imagine stepping back into the past, our guide tells us then, and I can't resist whispering to my father, this is where we split. I'll head around to the back. When he laughs, I know he's grateful. I've made a joke of it, this history that links us. White father, black daughter, even as it renders us other to each other.
Dirt by Quaim Dawes. We who gave owned nothing, learned the value of dirt. How a man or a woman can stand among the unruly growth, look far into its limits, a place of stone and entanglements, and suddenly understand the meaning of a name, a deed, a currency of personhood. Here, where we have labored for another man's gain, if it is fine to own dirt and stone, it is fine to have a plot where a body may be planted to rot. We who have built only that which others have owned learn the rituals of trees, the rights of fruits picked and eaten, the pleasures of ownership. We who have fled with swords at our backs know the things they have stolen from us, and we will walk naked and filthy into the open field, knowing only that this piece of dirt, this expanse of nothing, is the earnest of our faith in the idea of tomorrow. We will sell our bones for a piece of dirt. We will build new tribes and plant new seeds and bury our bones in our dirt.
Phyllis Wheatley was born in West Africa and was taken at the age of 7 or 8 years old. She was bought by a family in Boston, the Wheatley family. The Wheatleys' eldest daughter, Mary, tutored Phyllis in reading and writing. After seeing her talent in the art of poetry, the family encouraged her to write more. George Washington, among other highly respected political figures, loved Phyllis's poems, allowing her to get publicity. In September 1st, 1773, her poems were published in the form of a book, and shortly after, the Wheatleys set her free. Phyllis exchanged letters about her ideas on slavery and about religion with the leaders such as Reverend Samson Occum and philanthropist James Thornton. Thomas Paine even republished her poem in the Philadelphia Gazette. Phyllis married a free black man in 1778, and they lived with very little. They were incredibly poor despite her publication and suffered the deaths of 2 children. In 1779, she applied to publish another book, but did not have enough money. Her husband was arrested and imprisoned for debt, leaving Phyllis Wheatley and her sickly son alone with no income. She became a scullery maid and died short thereafter at the young age of 31. Phyllis was an optimist, and while her life was full of hardship and struggle, she maintained hope until the very end. Her poem, A Hymn to the Morning, depicts this as it starts off by describing the gloom and struggle in her life, but ends with the hopeful line, "See in the east the illustrious king of day, his rising radiance drives the shade away," letting us know that she depends on her God to get her through each day.
So what does that poem mean to you?
So to me, it shows that in the beginning she describes, let me pull up a specific line. But she says, let's see here. "Ye shady groves, your verdant gloom display to shield your poet from the burning day." So she talks about her life up to this point, and she talks about how she sees her life becoming better, and how she sees how God is driving away the trouble that came before, and how each day starts afresh. And that is so powerful, because especially coming from this woman who has lived her whole life either enslaved or impoverished, to see that kind of hope in a woman like this is very encouraging.
I also think that in the line that you were actually just saying, I think that she also finds the simple pleasures in life, and that's really all that she had. And I think 100% I agree with what you're saying, but to add on to that, I think that there's also a layer of her finding being a human and enjoying the sun and enjoying the shade that protects her is very powerful in what limitations the slaves had in terms of like material things.
I think that's really important, that her whole identity was being owned by someone. And unfortunately, even in the case of this poem, like, she got to experience the sun and everything and have kind of her own actions as a human, but was still unfortunately owned by somebody. And which is really unfortunate.
And a lot of the research I've done, the articles focus so much on, well, she wrote these poems and she was set free, and people like George Washington saw these things, and they focus more on what the white slave owners did for her instead of what she did for our culture.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important to focus on, because this woman poured everything she had into these poems, and they still look at it as, oh, look what these white men did for her. And that just, reading those articles, it shocked me how much that still was a theme.
Yeah. And that's kind of a theme in my poem. Specifically, one of the lines that she reads is, the improvement of the blacks in body and mind in the first instance of their mixture with the whites. So it's because of the white people that they made the accomplishments they made. But in this case, people really need to see that she wrote that poem. Those are her thoughts, those are her words, and that should be significant enough. It shouldn't matter that the white people who owned her are what helped her, because she did that.
In contrast to your poem, in mine, it focuses more on the pleasures of having something that's yours, even if it is pile of dirt. It's something. And towards the end of the poem, he says, filthy into the open fields, knowing only that this piece of dirt, this expanse of nothing, is the earnest of our faith in the idea of tomorrow. So I feel like your poem reflects a more cynical view of enslavement and what it meant to people, but our poems are more positive, looking towards the future, looking towards freedom and what potentials they had as slaves and as African American people in America in the 1800s.
Absolutely.
So for my poem Enlightenment, Natasha is like a world-renowned winning poet, and she was born on April 26th, or in 1996, or 1966. So she was born kind of like, her father was white and her mother was African American, and she was born in a time where that was something very new, and a really big reflection of that is in the poem, because for a long time people denied that Sally Hemings and Jefferson had children together. It was it was like, nope, that didn't happen. And then when it came out that it did, it started this conversation, like which is highly evident in the poem, the conversations of the tourist, that it was ignored, and then it became some kind of scientific and historic like resolution of a question of how white was she, what's this and that, and that can be seen in her relationship with her father. The whole poem is kind of about her relationship with her father and how she relates it to something that happened back in the 1800s, which I think is really interesting. And as I was doing research, she often talks about how that relationship existed and how her father saw her and saw her mother through that lens of, I'm helping her, I'm making her better, and eventually worked through that relationship with him. And now at the end of the poem there's more of a sense that he no longer looks through it with that lens, and that they have a better relationship. They can joke about it and know that that's not the case, that just the whites made them better.
Yeah, I do feel like she has some underlying feeling of not knowing exactly where she fits. Like in A Hymn to the Morning and in Dirt, both of the authors know their heritage. They know where they came from. There's no question about it. But I feel like in Enlightenment, she kind of struggles with am I? How white am I? How black am I? How do I contribute to the story of both white and black people in America? And I feel like maybe that's why she's a little more cynical, because it hurts her more, and it makes her feel kind of separated from both groups, because she's white, she's not treated like a black person, but because she's black, she's not treated like a white person.
I can see that.
Yeah, she's a lot more, she's obviously later in American history, and then, what did you say, 1966 was when she was born, so she was really born in the middle of segregation, right before it ended, so she got the butt end of that. And I think that growing up in that climate must have really affected her perception of herself.
I think you can really see this poem is her working through a lot of that as well, and a reflection of her life, which I think is really powerful.
And in our parents' generation, biracial marriages were so few and far between. So to see such a beautiful poem coming from a woman who is biracial, especially at this time period, that kind of showed both races that, this person is valuable, and though they don't necessarily belong to you or belong to the other race, they are so valuable and they see both sides.
So I guess I'll talk about my author. He wasn't born in America. He wasn't raised in America. He was born in 1962, so about the same time as your author. But he was actually raised in Jamaica. And a primary population during that time was escaped slaves or slaves that have been freed. So he has a lot of ties to slavery and understanding what it is to be a slave, and it's very in his culture. It's not necessarily shied away from, but it's not really talked about because it is a shameful past that a lot of people have, or at least a lot of Black people have in America. And he was very experimental in his expression. Obviously, like in the title of this poem, Dirt, you assume that it's going to be something not like negative, something that's not necessary. He could have said a word like soil or fertilizer or something like that, where it gives you a connotation of something that's important, but instead he uses the word dirt to represent the potential of growth. And while it is technically maybe not the best word to use, the most positive word, but it still shows that you can put something in it and it will grow. And I think that's a lot of where his mind was when he was talking about slavery, was that slaves were dehumanized, but they have all of this potential now to grow and to be better. And yes, it's going to be hard, and yes, they have to push through that dirt to get to the sunlight, but they'll get there one day. And a lot of his writings were focused on Jim Crow laws, the treatment of African Americans in the U.S., but I feel like it was less negative and more, okay, this happened, let's use this for our benefit. Let's empower ourselves, let's empower myself, and let's become better from this. And I feel like that since it is such a sensitive subject, maybe that's why he wasn't as popular as maybe Maya Angelou, where she would kind of beat around the bush with her themes, but he just said it, and he was very blatant in what he said. And I think maybe that's why he was kind of like shied away from in his earlier, like before now, I guess. But he's gaining a lot of popularity, and obviously he's still alive. So yeah.
I think something that connects all of our poems is, like you said, he didn't shy away from the topic. I don't think any of our artists are hiding anything, and which I think is really important. It shouldn't be something that's shameful to talk about.
Yeah.
This happened, and it should be talked about, and it should be expressed and dealt with, and these authors have the courage to do that.
And it is embarrassing. Like it's embarrassing that happened, but I do feel like we shouldn't feel so shy because it happened, and especially like because all of these authors were African American, I think that it makes them feel ashamed of part of themselves if it's not talked about. And I think that it's a way to empower others by talking about it and discussing like its effects on themselves.
Yeah, and I think like a cool connection between both Dirt and Between a Hint in the Morning is the sheer optimism in both of them, and then the interesting aspect of in the Enlightenment, the realism. And so looking at these three different poems, you can see how the authors look at their situation, and I think the way that he looks at it, it's very interesting because while he quickly addresses the topic, he never says anything to pity himself necessarily. It's all very empowering, like you said. So,
I really think that the first line is what's standing out to me the most. We who gave own nothing, learned the value of dirt. That they still give, and he gave, and they all give without having owned anything. I don't know, that just line is really powerful, and it's the first line of the poem. So he really grabs your attention right away.
He does have a flair for style, to say the least, and I think that also at the very end, throughout the poem he talks about the benefit of dirt and how you can be so prideful in it. But at the very end it says, "We will build new tribes and plant new seeds and bury our bones in the dirt." I think that's a reflection of kind of like a skeleton in the closet where you want to bury it and you don't want to talk about it, and you don't want to say, yes, we treated people awful for hundreds of years. And I think that him saying bury our bones in the dirt represents the embarrassment and the shame maybe that comes with knowing that your ancestors were slaves. So I feel like bury our bones in the dirt just means we'll use these awful things to help grow whatever's next in our lives and whatever's coming next for our family members in the future.
Something to add to that, because I'm reading it off of a different screen, so it might be worded different on yours. It says, and bury our bones in our dirt.
Yeah.
I think everything that you say I agree with, and that also the in our dirt part could be significant in that they're now taking control of that, and they are burying it, and it's their choice to do that, and it's in their dirt. I don't know, that just seemed...
It's definitely an important choice. He didn't just throw that out there. Thank you for listening to our podcast on Honorably Understanding the World.